Well, hey, church family, so glad that you are watching this in an effort to make sure that, we are communicating with you as much as we possibly can. We wanted to go ahead and make this video for you to kind of pull back the curtain on just the thought processes that we are having as your leaders on what it looks like to make plans to move into a space where we are getting ready to gather back in person. We want to make sure that we're approaching this with diligence and wisdom, and we wanted to just kind of address really what we think are two major questions that you may have as we navigate this time of dealing with the virus, and then also thinking about what it looks like to go back to a place where we can gather in person. So the first question that we think that is kind of like big and overarching that you may have for us that we want to address is, first, why have we made the decisions we've made so far, and what is guiding those decisions? So to answer that, start off, I'll go ahead and pass it to Bruce.
Yes, we as a church, we're a family. And when families get together, we have a tendency to congregate, to talk, to hug, to shake hands. And then if you got a family with kids interact, and the whole concept of social distancing, it's tough. When I'm together with family, I don't know about anybody else, but I just love to be around and talk about what's going on. And so for us as a congregation, we are a family, and that's what we should be doing. We should be getting together and caring about one another. And when you're a family of about 300 people, which we as a church are, how do you protect everybody and follow the guidelines that our government is asking us to try to do? And the only way we know how to do that is by basically going to an online setup where we eliminate the opportunities, if you will, for that loss of social distancing.
Yeah, and it's been heartbreaking for all of us to have to send these updates to you and extend the time where we're being online only, and just want you to know that it's hurting us, and we want to definitely be with you again. But that's the kind of rationale for us wanting to make sure that we're protecting each other, and on why we went online only in the very beginning. And so I want to transition to the second question. I think this is the major question that everyone has on their mind, and that is how soon before we can gather in person again. And to begin kind of maybe a discussion on this, to provide a foundation, we want to read some passages of scripture to you that are going to basically provide a guideline, a foundation for how we are navigating that question, the answer to that question. So first is Exodus chapter 22, verses 21, 22, and 25. And this is what it says. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not treat it like a business deal. Charge no interest. And the next one is Matthew 25, verse 40. It says this: truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me.
Also reading from 1 Corinthians 12, verses 22 through 24. Those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. And then from James 1:27, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress.
Yeah, and right off the bat, you may not really see the connection between those passages, but what we find as we read those and we look at the scripture is that all of those talk about defending and God's concern for the most vulnerable people in our society. that whether you're a foreigner, a widow, an orphan, even Jesus in the story of the sheep and the goats and doing for the least really relates to the most vulnerable. And so for us, that really, as we've had this discussion as elders, has become kind of our guiding principle. Is how do we protect the most vulnerable members of our society? And really, actually, if you even look at it, the greatest story in the Bible is obviously Jesus coming down. And in the end, all of us as humans are vulnerable to sin. And so the one person who wasn't, Jesus, came and lived among us as a servant to basically save us in all our vulnerability. And really, in doing that, Jesus lived out one more verse that I'd like to read. In humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each to the interests of others. So as we go forward and make decisions, that really for us has been our foundation for those decisions.
And Bruce, you want to go ahead and share, like, just as we've been approaching this as an elder team, just what our meetings look like, how frequently we're meeting, and why.
Yeah. As an eldership, we have been trying to meet at least every other week. I mean, the situation right now is so fluid with things changing day to day with the whole COVID-19 pandemic that we have to sit back and listen daily to what is being told to us by our state and federal government on how to deal with this and what the expectations are to try to control its infectious rate across the country. So we meet, like I say, at least once every other week. We have met more, and when this first came out, because we had to make some quick decisions. And so we we meet, we talk, and review our plans versus what the governmental guidelines are that we've been given, and decide using these biblical principles that we just discussed, what it is we need to do to protect our flock, and also to try to make sure that we're doing our part as a church to help protect our community.
Yeah, and as we've been working through those things, I found kind of an approach that I think is helpful as we've been working through that as well, just practically speaking. If you think about a kind of Venn diagram with 3 circles, with each of those circles representing a principle, we're trying to find the intersection of all 3 of these. So the 3 things are safety, proactivity, and flexibility. We want to make sure that we're making plans that are safe and plans that are proactive and that plans are flexible, because if you've been watching, observing the developments, things change and they can change quickly. So we want to make sure that we're trying to find the nice happy medium in all of those things. And next, I just want to kind of, Bruce and I are going to walk through a little bit of what the federal kind of guidelines have been that the coronavirus task force has released, and giving states guidance on how to safely and responsibly kind of reopen and lift some of these stay-at-home orders. And then as the states are looking at giving guidance to local businesses and organizations on what it looks like to kind of get things going again in person. So just to kind of give you an overarching view, what we have seen from, you can get this at whitehouse.gov, is that they are looking at 3 phases of an approach. And each of those phases has different parameters and guidelines to go off of. But in order to get into phase 1, is you have to see, and this is obviously guidelines, and governors are going to take these guidelines and they are going to work it with their context. So in order to get into phase 1 as a state, based on these guidelines, you would want to see 14 days of steady decline in COVID-19 cases. So before you get into phase 1, there's 14 days of decline. And then once you get into phase 1, then they want to see that 14-day decline continue again. So you repeat it. And so then you get into phase two, which phase two, some of the highlights would be they are recommending no social gatherings over 50 people, especially when physical distancing is not possible. And so phase two, some of the thoughts we've had would be, can we look at community groups kind of getting back and to gather in person? There's some challenges with that. And so, we're just talking about thought processes here, not ultimate decisions. But then once you get into phase two, there's another 14-day period that you need to see continual decline in terms of new cases and the results from COVID-19. And then you get into phase three, and phase three is really lifting a lot of the stipulations and recommendations that we've been living under. They are lifting that in phase three. So with that in mind, we're going to have to intentionally ease back into regathering. But it looks like phase three is going to be that space where we're going to be able to actually implement that, gathering in person again. Unfortunately, that's kind of what those phases look like. Now, again, things could change quickly with governors, and then also, we could wake up tomorrow and the virus be completely gone. But based on the guidance we have currently, that's what it's looking like. And we would plan on continuing to broadcast our service online, probably like a Monday evening of some kind for those who may choose to stay home even once that happens. So that's kind of just a very overarching overview, just based on the guidelines that are available for anybody to go and download. Bruce, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple comments. From a state standpoint, we're divided into 10 health zones. Yeah. And so obviously our health zone is tied in kind of the northeast corner of Indiana, which includes Allen County and Adams County and just the surrounding counties around here. Indianapolis obviously has been one of the hot zones of the state. It's about half of the, maybe actually over half of the confirmed cases are around Marion County and the surrounding counties of that, with the population there. So the governor has mentioned that these phases, like the federal government has outlined, that this, as a state sees fit to make modifications to that timing, that they may be specific to certain health zones. So we might be sooner, we might be held up depending upon what Allen County does. Obviously, our surrounding counties around here have had minimal infections compared to some of the bigger cities. And the big issue that is so difficult with this virus is it takes 3 to 14 days to get any results back after you take a phase step. And so it's not like you can turn on X changes and then 2 days later go, oh yeah, we're okay, or nope, we got to go back. It takes 3 to 14 days, and that's what is so frustrating, because it, that means, that's 2 weeks for every step. And I think we as a society are not that patient.
Yeah, absolutely. So once we get to the point of looking at gathering again in person, there may be some things that may look a little bit different than what have been in the past. So Jeff, you want to talk a little bit about some of those things?
Yeah, but before I do, just to kind of make it more clear, we are talking 3 phases, of which we're not even in phase 1 yet, and 2-week periods there. So you just stretch that out from the beginning of May, and we're really already into June by the time you're into phase 3. So, and the thing that's going to be different about this is, this isn't like the end of World War II, where the war was over and people went out in the streets and had big celebrations, because obviously that would start this all over again. And so even when we get to the point of starting services in person again, it's very possible that it will probably still involve some form of physical distancing. And whether that, whether we're going to have to space the chairs out in the sanctuary and limit the number of people who can attend, And based on that, we may even be talking about, you know, having to know who's coming to what service, just because our limit on our sanctuary may be 100 people or less if chairs are spread out. So, you know, just even things like flow through the building of, we may pretty much ask people to come in one door, flow into the sanctuary, come out a different door, out to the parking lot with a controlled dismissal. So, you know, and it's not that any of these things are things we know we're going to do, but we want you to start being aware that we're thinking along these lines, that the first Sunday we meet is not going to be 300 of us all packed into some tiny little space hugging each other, just for safety and protecting the vulnerable reasons.
Also, there, you know, as we look into what is going to be going on, the when we do communion, we may end up having sealed packets. Offering may be dropped off at the doors instead of passing the plate. With our kids and the gathering of them, you know, making sure that the things that they touch and handle are controlled. And maybe if we have multiple services to keep our size numbers down, we would have to have different toys, for instance, or different things for the kids to use from one service to the next so that they can be cleaned properly. It's just one of those things that we might even have to have a little extra time between services to allow the appropriate cleaning that needs to be done to protect people from coming in contact, like on door handles and bathrooms and things like that. But, you know, we understand that for some people that may still be an uncomfortable situation due to the health risks that can come with that. So, you know, we want to try to create a environment that both people who can gather and people who are not comfortable gathering can still come to worship. You know, where two or more are together, the Lord will be there. And so we may have a combination for a while of online service in the evening, or maybe Monday or something like that, and our regular service there at the church at that point.
Yeah, so, you know, in summary of all this, church, hopefully you're seeing that we as leaders, we're trying to do our due diligence. We're trying to make sure that we are staying on top of this and really taking into account all of the dynamics that come with it and what that means for a church that, you know, one of the main methodologies that we have had throughout the centuries is getting people together in the same space, in close proximity, and realizing that that is one of the biggest things that allows this virus to spread, and realizing that we've had to make some methodological changes. But at the same time, as we navigate what it looks like to come back, understand we're trying to do as much as we possibly can to do this safely, with wisdom, and just with the guidance of the Holy Spirit, while also sticking to biblical principles on what it looks like for us to love each other well. So hopefully this has been encouraging to you. Hopefully it's at least been helpful and informational for you. We hope and pray that it was. And we want to continue communicating with you and keeping you up to date with what we are thinking through. Again, these were a lot of thoughts, and you know, the circumstances could change. But currently, at this present moment, those are the thoughts that we've had, and the kind of approach that we're taking. So again, hopefully this was helpful. We can't wait to see you again. We love you, church, and we are praying for you on a constant basis.